Can you hear us? Oh, I think.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, John. How are you?
Yeah, yes, fine. So let me find the right place. Let me share my screen. Talks about it. Okay, so hi everyone. I'll do a quick recap of the Kubernetes main event of the year, the KubeCon and CloudNativeCon, and this was the North America edition that ended late last week. But please let me first introduce myself. I'm Johan Tordsson. I'm CTO and co-founder of a company in Sweden called Elastisys, who is a highly specialized professional service and managed service provider within Kubernetes and Cloud Native. And I also have a spare time job as a researcher in computer science. So what we do at Elastisys is that we're building a tailored Kubernetes distribution that we call for Compliant Kubernetes, and that is sort of security hardware built for regulatory compliance, such as fulfilling GDPR controls. So check it out at compliantkubernetes.io if you're interested. So my first impression is from this year's KubeCon is that, I mean, this was the second time they had an event totally online as opposed to big physical meetings, and it sort of very much found its form. So I mean, the previous edition that was in August was very much rushed online because it was supposed to be this big physical conference in Amsterdam, and due to the unfortunate situation in the world, they moved it online. But now they actually planned it to be online from the very beginning, and there was a lot of good ways of interacting. Jag presenterar. So that's my son in the background, begging for some sweets, and he's getting it. So okay, so I mean, like interacting with the games where participants could chat, a lot of Slack channels, and a lot of very good pre-recorded content and so. And about the actual talks, I mean, the quality really improved a lot when people got to prepare it. And two of my personal favorites here was one talk called The Flight Over the Cloud Native Landscape, where someone did a lot of very nice illustrations of what are all these tools, what is Kubernetes, Helm, and so on, and how can they use them together. And the one to the right was someone making a really interactive movie about how to render movies for the internet, and he sort of thanked his cameraman in the text going along with the talk. So overall, when people get to prepare, talks become very, very good. So let's talk a bit about the cloud native community as well. And I think where they really excel is to create an open source community that's really diverse. So they're very welcoming to everyone in the sense that you can be a contributor in this community even though you don't write code. So you can talk at meetups as I'm doing right now. You can provide documentation and training and so on. And I mean, this is also reflecting in a recent initiative they're doing, which is called inclusive naming, is to really try to revisit the actual lingo we're using in the community. So for example, it's perhaps not so good to use the term blacklisting to refer to IP addresses that may not contact a certain name point, because I mean, that gives a bad connotation to the name black as such. So it should be called allow listing and deny listing instead. Another way that the cloud native community is really caring in these difficult times is that they actually started to release Kubernetes only 3 times per year now instead of 4 times per year. And this is not at all for technical reasons, but really because people cannot really keep up in these difficult times and updating all the clusters all the time as well. So, and I mean, another overall theme is really the focus on all the newcomers that have not been using Kubernetes for very long and are new to the conference as well, and all the end users. But I mean, this becomes very natural because just in a few years, KubeCon has been growing from 500 people, mostly core contributors to various projects and advanced users to more than 20,000 attendees. And out of these 20,000, many are beginners. So let me give an example of how they really cater to the end user. So these were two keynotes talks that were given at different days. And the first one was from a company called Apple. You may know them. They make mobile phones and laptops and so on. And I mean, the Apple story about Kubernetes is that they went from Mesos, which was this other orchestration system, to Kubernetes. And I mean, their challenges is really to find a lot of different ways to make this fit all of the different use cases. They're looking for pluggability and extensibility. And to Apple, multi-tenancy was a big issue because they have many, many different groups of developers with rather different requirements. So should they really give out namespaces in existing clusters to the different development teams, or should they each team get their own cluster? And how would you handle security and privacy in these sort of different scenarios with different groups of users? Some are very advanced and some basically just want somewhere to run their containers. And I mean, the end goal of all of these Kubernetes efforts within Apple were very similar to the Apple end goals as such. That Apple wants to provide productivity and happiness to their end users, and then the same thing internally to their developers using Kubernetes. At the sort of other end of the spectrum, here shown to the right in the figure, we have this guy called David. And he leads a small DevOps team of 5 people, working in the company with around 100 people. And they're also very interested in Kubernetes. And just as Apple, they're building their own tools. But they try to focus very much on doing minor modifications to create their own platform. And I mean, for this kind of organization, there's a lot of interesting trade-offs in sort of building, perhaps not really versus buying, but building versus waiting. Because if there's something that they need that is not too exotic, the community will basically create something very similar really shortly. And I mean, an interesting trade-off here for someone like David or other small companies is the simplicity versus the complexity. So I mean, you can get a lot of advanced functionality, but it also comes at the cost of complexity. And as Kubernetes is so broad and targets so many different use cases, it's necessarily complex. But very interesting here, the goal of David and his developer teams are very much the same as the goals of Apple, that they want to increase their productivity by using Kubernetes. So let me tell a bit about what's happening in the cloud native community in the Kubernetes. And this is sort of adoption curve that is mapped onto the 3 different levels of cloud native computing foundation projects, starting with sandbox projects. And I mean, there's a lot of sandbox projects here, and these are by definition just some open source software that is donated to the CNCF that solves an interesting problem in the cloud native space. And very, very little more is needed, but there needs to be an approval. So the CNCF is not GitHub. So they don't just host a lot of open source projects, but they have to have a good fit for the overall mission. And then we can move on to more mature product can upgrade to be incubating. And here there's actually quite some due diligence done. So senior people in the community try them out to see that they solve problem, and they actually have to also be in production use by at least a few organizations. And there has to be a healthy level of new commits to this project. Then the very top level are the graduated projects. And here there's a lot of requirements related to governance, how the project is run. It cannot be a single company project, but has to be a good mix of both people in a sort of leading position and just contributors. And there has to be substantial uptake in production as well. So if we look at what's happened the last few months, is that there's been a couple of new products graduating. So I mean, the Rook storage orchestrator and integration system is now production quality. The TyKiwi key value database, which is a very nice scalable, horizontally scalable key value store, also graduated. And as of 2 days ago, the etcd, the small, sort of smaller key value store, which is the backend that keeps and synchronizes the state inside Kubernetes itself, is also graduated, along with a lot of well-proven products such as Kubernetes, Prometheus, and so on that many used. And if you also look at the incubating projects, I mean, there are now more than 20 projects in incubation, and Sandbox even more. So overall, there's a very big toolbox of different open source projects associated with Kubernetes. So you have things for CI/CD, for deploying, for messaging, for monitoring, alternative runtimes, various security tools, service meshes, messaging queues, policy management, etc., as well as operator framework that we'll hear a bit more about in a later presentation today. So, and I mean, what's interesting to notice here is that incubating projects may be production ready for some and already used in production, but not for everyone. And also, as there are so many sandbox projects, it's very natural that not all sandbox projects actually will be successful. So if you plan to actually start to use a sandbox project, take care, because some of these will be merged with others and others will just be shut down. So perhaps that's not for production use unless it's really, really, really urgent for your organization to use that. So moving on, if you take a look at the agenda of the event itself, you can see that the most popular topics, top to bottom, is really beginner sort of one-on-one sessions of getting started with Kubernetes and doing the very basics, followed by operations. I mean, how do I really run my Kubernetes cluster? A few years ago, there was a lot of interest in how they really install Kubernetes, but that's more a solved problem now. So nowadays, people focus more to day two operations. Then, of course, lots of people are interested in how to develop and deploy applications to Kubernetes clusters, including topics like continuous integration and deployment. And in this particular field, there's a lot of interest in this GitOps paradigm, where you keep all your application configuration in Git, and then either pull or push that one into your clusters automatically. But I mean, this is, in my very personal opinion, it's a great idea and a lot of sophisticated automation, but it's not for everyone, because in particular, if you have poor test coverage, this can really, really cause problems, because what's the saying? To err is human, but to err and roll it out into all your production clusters, that will be GitOps. So do mind adopting very, very advanced configuration unless you have a very good and solid testing in place. And then, of course, there's an increasing interest in topics relating to security, identity, and policy management. And I mean, here, many of the keynotes really touch upon that there seems to be a trend of moving from, let's call it regular DevOps, to something we can call DevSecOps, where we integrate not only development and operate organizations into cross-functional teams, but that you would actually bring people from your security team into this. There's also a lot of interest in various ways of trying to hack into Kubernetes, breaking into Kubernetes, and for some reason the community has adopted the goose, basically from this untitled goose game, as the sort of the main attacker of the Kubernetes cluster. And more officially, there's actually a new certification now that's a complement to the Certified Kubernetes Admin and the Certified Kubernetes Application Developer, which is the Certified Kubernetes Security Specialist. So overall, there's a lot of interest in increased security. I mean, this feels very natural as more and more companies, also in sort of security sensitive industries, such as financial services and so on, actually adopt Kubernetes for production. So according to the governing technical board of the CNCF, there's a few technologies that are worth watching out for in the coming time. And the first one being chaos engineering, which many of you perhaps know most from the Chaos Monkey that Netflix wrote for Amazon. That is software that intentionally tries to break down your production infrastructure and software in order to test its robustness. And this makes a lot of sense because as we're moving to more and more complex systems with many components, many microservices and so, this sort of structured bottom-up testing, unit testing, integration testing and so on can only bring us so far. But if you really want to understand and test the reliability of your system, you need to turn to these chaos engineering tools. And there's a lot of good such tools written directly for Kubernetes, such as the Powerful Seal and the Chaos Toolkit and so on. So do check them out. The other major trend that we like to see is that as we're now rolling out 5G telco networks and there's a lot of interest in edge computing overall, of course, people want to run Kubernetes at the edge. So we're seeing projects such as KubeEdge, or sort of slimmed down Kubernetes distributions such as K3s. Recently, there was an even smaller one called K0s. The sort of single binaries containing whole clusters that can be run in low power devices far from the data centers. To little surprise, there's also still a lot of interest in service meshes. And here we see a lot of diversity. There are many different service meshes. There's more or less immature, but there's a lot of interest in this. So likely we'll see some sort of consolidation here, perhaps, on the different projects. And many of these are very feature rich, and someone summarizes that no development team ever asked for a service mesh, but a lot of people are asking for various features of a service mesh, such as observability across different microservices and so on. Two other trends that are related but yet unrelated that we see a lot of is WebAssembly and eBPF. First one being the sort of compiled runtime format where you can run your high-performance libraries written in some other language, such as C or Rust or whatever, directly, for example, in your web browser, and eBPF being this great tool for Linux kernel observability and control. And I mean, what these have in common is that they provide some basic sandboxing, they have very high performance, and they allow a lot of customization. So these seem to be important building blocks that will be used in many different projects going forward. Final prediction is that we'll see a lot of improvement in user experience, both for people developing applications for Kubernetes and for operators that run in clusters. And I mean, to date, there's too much manual editing of these YAML configuration files where the slightest indentation error will just make stuff don't work. So there's likely a lot of better tooling coming up in this area. And as a sort of related trend here is that we're very much moving into a world where multi-clusters are the norm. So instead of having your pet Kubernetes cluster, your Kubernetes cluster is more of a throwaway or a cattle. So you create it automatically, it may live for very short, and it's very easy to remove as well. So, I mean, if I'm allowed to make a few summarizing takeaways, I think that Kubernetes is kind of becoming boring. It's not so exciting to create a cluster, use it for a while, and so on anymore. But there's a lot of interesting things that you can build on top of that. And nowadays, many people are actually using Kubernetes without really understanding that this is Kubernetes. So this is just a basic building block in platforms for developers. And I think that's a good progress. There's much happening in the community. So there are many new projects, and there are many projects with a similar scope and similar goals. And it's kind of, from an outside perspective, hard to understand. So should I use Thanos or should I use Cortex, and what's the difference? 1 year from now, what will happen? Will there only be one? Will they merge or not? But, I mean, this is also a good opportunity to find and utilize a lot of interesting technology. And finally, as I mentioned, I think that the developer experience will improve a lot going forward, and similarly for people who actually operate clusters. So thank you for listening to me, and I'm happy to answer any questions. I know that for those who didn't attend the conference, that all of the talks will go online on the CNCF YouTube by, I think it was December 4, so hang in another week or two. and all the content will be available.
That's fine. Yeah, I don't see any questions, but feel free to contact John directly. You will receive his email contacts, his email address a few days after this event and the presentation itself. So thank you, John, for that.